I'm back from Podcast Movement 2025, and I have some thoughts. Thank you for joining me for the Audacity to Podcast. I'm Daniel J. Lewis. I really enjoy going to podcasting conferences, if you couldn't tell from my previous episode about why you should attend live events for your podcast. That doesn't necessarily mean a podcasting conference, but it could be a conference in general. I enjoy public speaking. I enjoy hanging out with other podcasters of all shapes and sizes and types. It's a whole lot of fun. And the premier podcasting event for many years has been Podcast Movement. I was one of the original backers, and I've spoken at most of the Podcast Movement events over the years. And it's been around for more than 10 years now. It's incredible to think of still that first conference many years ago and how it's grown and changed since then. And I attended both Podcast Movement Evolutions and Podcast Movement proper this year, 2025, and things are changing again. And I have some thoughts, mostly good thoughts, some concerns as well. And I invite you to share your thoughts as well. If you have any way of responding to this or commenting on the notes over at theaudacitytopodcast.com/PM25. I would love to hear from you, especially if you made it to Podcast Movement. So I've got several thoughts here. And the biggest thing that most people are talking about is Podcast Movement and Sounds Profitable and Podnews mixed in. So this is that big news from the event and coverage around the event is that Podcast Movement has acquired Sounds Profitable. Sounds Profitable is a podcasting education, research, and insights organization with lots of information there. Now, most of it is primarily from the business and advertising perspective of podcasting, but they do also do a lot of industry research, especially now that they have Tom Webster, formerly of Edison Research, working for Sounds Profitable. So that brings all of Tom's vast experience and knowledge of how to analyze the space and pull insights about the space and his great voice too. And all of that research too Sounds Profitable. And that helps the industry as a whole, even independent podcasters who aren't monetizing their podcasts at all. Now, this move puts Brian Barletta, the founder of Sounds Profitable, to be the president of Podcast Movement. Exactly what that means, we'll see in the coming months. And also made public at this time is that Podcast Movement has owned 50% of Podnews, the podcast newsletter over at podnews.net. And they've actually owned that 50% for some years now. And it seems as though James Cridland, the founder of Podnews, will become the head of content at Podcast Movement and probably be a major decision maker in the conference content going forward. I have great respect for both men and most of their industry perspectives. Based on some things that I've seen, though, I think some people might be concerned if this will cause Podcast Movement to lean hard into a particular political direction or even a particular advertising direction. And while time will really tell, I also think there's some justification to those concerns. Nonetheless, in conversations I had and observed with James Cridland, I think he's already making some good decisions about Podcast Movement's content and keynotes going forward. Along with these organizational changes also come some location changes. New York City and Austin, and these locations might be long-term for Podcast Movement. Podcast Movement, the main conference that is, was going to be in San Diego in 2026, but that has now been changed to New York City. That will make it a lot easier for international travelers, and that certainly puts Podcast Movement a commute away, probably a long commute, but a commute nonetheless from many of the top advertisers and content networks in podcasting. So this move makes me think Podcast Movement will only become even more corporate. Additionally, Podcast Movement Evolutions, which I wondered if it would even exist after this year, because at the Evolutions event in Chicago, it was quite a bit underwhelming as far as attendance. The content was still great, and the people who were there were still great to talk to and network with, but there were a lot fewer people than I and I think many others expected, and a lot fewer exhibitors as well. So despite that, though, Podcast Movement Evolutions is moving in with South by Southwest, or SXSW, and I think it's so much easier to say South by Southwest than the abbreviation for it. I suspect that Brian Barletta gets most of the credit for this, as he should, because he was the one that got a whole podcasting track at South by Southwest recently as well. But this also confuses me, and in talking with others, it confuses them too, about the focus of these events. I've talked to many people about their perceptions of podcast movement and podcast movement evolutions, which I'll probably just call evolutions from here on out in this episode. And I heard about half the people say that evolutions was for industry professionals and normal podcast movement was for content creators. But the other half, including myself, said it's the other way around. And then this is where I'm now, that kind of person in the middle between the two halves who doesn't really know anymore which one is for industry professionals and which one is for content creators. I often thought evolutions was more for the industry professionals, while podcast movement proper was for the creators, because that's how it started in the beginning. But with this move to New York City for podcast movement and South by Southwest for evolutions, I get the impression that evolutions will be more for the creators, especially the first-time podcasters and those who are doing a whole lot of other content creation who will be there at South by Southwest, while podcast movement in New York City, up close to all of these advertisers and huge networks, will then be more for the industry professionals. But the unfortunate thing about both, they are going to be really expensive to attend and get hotels. New York City will be hard enough, but Austin will be as booked as Bethlehem on the night of Jesus' birth. So I guess get ready to sleep in a stable. Nonetheless, perhaps to balance this out, some good news to come from this is that conference recordings will be free, completely free. This is perhaps to help relieve some of the stress about the cost of the new locations, but also I think in line with Sounds Profitable's core philosophies, and that is that industry information should be free. When Sounds Profitable does a report, they often release it completely free. They might have some kind of email opt-in that you have to do, but you don't have to pay to get the report. They make it available for free, and that's sponsored by their partners that they have, and the partners have their own benefits that they get, but the research and the information is free. And Sounds Profitable is bringing that same core philosophy to podcast movement, and already now, with Podcast Movement 2025, all the sessions were recorded, and they are going to be publishing all of those sessions for free. And they've said that future conferences will also have all sessions recorded and all sessions be free. Thus, anyone from anywhere will be able to watch or listen to the sessions. They might not be live streamed, and based on the conference internet, I really suspect that they wouldn't be, but at least the sessions would be free. So if you want to go to learn, then you'll be able to learn from home or on the commute or wherever you can consume the sessions that are published afterward, because they will be free. And I think this is a really smart move. But as I pointed out in my previous episode about attending live events, the sessions are often not the biggest value of a conference. And I still have yet to see a virtual conference have the same great networking and relationship building that an in-person event has. And I've experienced some of them over the years, especially since the whole COVID stuff happened. And I say experienced some of them because I've not experienced all of them that I've registered for, just because it was like more Zoom meetings or whatever technology they're using at the time, and staring at a camera and all of this stuff. And it's just not as personable. It's not as relatable. It's certainly not as connecting as in-person networking is. And I think a big part of that is, this will sound weird, but being able to touch people. Like shake a hand, give a hug, a high five, a fist bump, something like that. Physically giving each other a business card, patting each other on the back, different things like that. You know, all the professional and friendly touches like that. I think those are very meaningful, and not just from a friendship perspective, but even from a business perspective, because you can read some people by their handshake. And there's even the thing about, is someone willing to give you a handshake? There have been a couple times where I've been snubbed from getting a handshake from someone, even though I extended a handshake in friendship to someone, they refused to give a handshake back. And that hurt. But that's an emotional connection that was shut down. That kind of emotional connection happens in person. And digitally, I wouldn't have that same kind of experience. And that actually might be a bad thing because then I wouldn't even know, oh, that person doesn't like me if they refuse to shake my hand, because shaking hands doesn't happen online. It happens in person. A lot of great things happen in person relationally. Humans are designed to be in person with each other. And we'll miss that if we don't get that live in-person feel like we get at the podcast conferences in the past, where we go and attend. And if in the future, the podcast movement conferences are mostly going to be the professionals, then that might mean we won't be as interested in going. But if the sessions are all available, at least you'll get some of the information that was shared in the sessions. My next thought will initially sound negative, but I'm not so sure it is. The podcast movement conferences are getting smaller. That might not actually be a bad thing. In 2025, I've attended several conferences. Podfest Multimedia Expo in Orlando, National Religious Broadcasters, or NRB, convention in Dallas, Podcast Movement Evolutions in Chicago, and Podcast Movement proper in Dallas. Both of the Podcast Movement events are getting noticeably smaller, while NRB and I think Podfest are getting larger. I'll leave the theorizing about why that's happening to people with more data, but I actually liked that Podcast Movement was smaller this year. The entire conference fit in a single big room in the Gaylord Texan Hotel in Dallas. The keynotes, expo hall, breakout sessions, speaker and sponsored lounge, and most of the networking all happened within that same big room. It still felt very professional, so it wasn't like it was just everybody thrown into this one space. But it also had a bit more of an intimate feel like the early conferences had, because we were very centralized instead of being spread out. Like Podcast Movement Evolutions, we were on multiple floors, very spread out, multiple rooms in different places, sessions happening all over the place. Same thing with several past Podcast Movement events. But that wasn't the case here because everything was in one big room, including the expo hall. Yes, there was a little bit of stuff happening out in the hallways, but the main reason to be in the hallways was for the networking, and it was still in the hallway right outside that really big room. The Gaylord hotels and resorts are great spaces for large conferences for sure. And where we were in this place, I've been there before for NRB convention, where every room was packed and the expo hall was downstairs and huge and all of that. Well, here we were in one big room and I liked it. And I think a lot of other people liked it based on the conversations that I had. And one of those reasons was, and this is my next thought, the expo hall was pleasant again. Being all in the same room, you would think that the sound would be confusing and deafening. I've attended some of the podcast movement's past events, and maybe you were there too, where there were breakout sessions in the expo hall, and they were far too loud with the PA systems, and yet people still couldn't hear or focus very well on those presentations. And then the poor vendors and other people around in the expo hall had to yell to have conversations at their booths or in the aisles. It was so loud and so difficult to network in past years. But this year, it was so very different. Two things made it so radically different this year: acoustics and smart headphones. The big room had enough acoustic treatment in the walls, carpets, and ceiling that sound didn't reverberate as much as when everything is in a typical expo space where they bring the carpet in. Otherwise, it's just concrete on the ground and all the walls are hard concrete and the ceiling is some kind of hard and very reflective surface. Now, when you're in essentially a conference room, don't think conference room like a conference room in an office place, but a conference room like where conferences or conventions are held. But a large space like that, it's a hotel conference room. It's a lot more padded and the acoustics are a whole lot better. So that was great. That absorbed the sound a whole lot more. It made conversations a whole lot easier. And it was also more comfortable for walking around when you're walking on carpet that's built into the floor instead of carpet that was just trucked in. But the more technological advancement was in the smart headphones everyone had. There were closed-back headphones that could receive audio wirelessly, and each pair of headphones could be switched to different channels like red, blue, white, yellow, purple, and some combinations of those colors. This meant the sessions didn't need a public address system. or at least not a loud one. Some of the sessions did have a PA system, but they didn't use it all that much. And everyone with the headphones could hear very well, and they could even adjust their listening volume as necessary. That was fantastic. It meant a near normal volume conversation could be happening right behind me, but I could still focus on the session I was watching because I was listening through my headphones. And there were several times I just didn't even realize there was a conversation happening right behind me because it wasn't interrupting, it wasn't distracting. I could focus on the headphones. And I've heard from some of the other speakers too that they noticed their audience seemed more focused. Adam Curry, surprisingly, Adam Curry loved it. He was very skeptical when he heard about it. And certainly there are jokes to be made about how the audience looks when they're in this state. But it worked out really well. He loved it. Other speakers, I think, really liked it. You just do have to get over that dystopian look of it all and try not to think about Doctor Who's Cybermen or jogging up to throw a sledgehammer into the screen, telling people why 1984 won't be like 1984. But as a speaker, and I presented on what you need to know about podcasting 2.0, I felt a bit disconnected from my audience because of the headphones. It was great that I could talk at a normal volume. And because I've done so much public speaking in the past where I didn't have a microphone, and maybe it's just an odd reaction. It's a habit I need to get over. I admit that. I need to get over this habit. But I have a tendency when I'm in front of a crowd, even when I'm holding a microphone, to project my voice more and to be louder than I need to be. And I do the same thing if I am recording a video interview like at CES or sometimes at Podcast Movement where I'm in a loud space, but I have a microphone right in front of me. I forget that the microphone can hear me just fine. I don't need to yell, but I know a lot of people do this, but it's something I'm working on overcoming in myself. It's that hearing a lot of sound around me, I feel like I need to be louder, and other people often feel the same. But the headphones did make it so that everyone could hear me for sure. So I think actually this time I did a better job at not yelling or projecting my voice when I was talking into the microphone. It felt a lot like podcasting, and so much like podcasting that I think some of us even felt like taking off our pants. But when it came to audible responses from my audience, especially laughter, I felt very disconnected, just like I did when I told that joke about taking off your pants, because I couldn't hear you laugh. There at the event, I couldn't hear the audience laugh because the expo hall was just loud enough that I couldn't hear those sounds from my audience. So I had to scan the whole crowd to see if they were laughing instead of just hearing the combined laughter like you would get inside a room where everything is quiet. And then when the audience laughs, you hear their laughter. And if they're still laughing, you know to wait longer or anything like that. It's just a little bit of the energy was different. Nonetheless, I think the sessions in the expo hall were much better with this setup, especially compared to without this setup. And I felt like we podcasters didn't have to worry so much about protecting our moneymakers, which are our voices. That is, if you don't think about the parties, which I'm convinced are forever cursed to be always way too loud and pump the music into too many places, like you can't escape the music at the parties. Nonetheless, it was really neat being all in the same room there at the expo hall, and you could see people walk from session to session, and they were going back and forth in the room or from session to session in the same room. So I think the vendors got a lot more foot traffic because they were in the middle of all of this. And sometimes you had to walk through the vendor area to get to the next session. And I think that was good because then you got to see the vendors, maybe connect with them along the way. And the other people passing the other way, like two ships in the night, or maybe not, depending on how that actually plays out in that metaphor. But anyway, you could talk to people, see them, and ask, hey, how'd your session go? I'm going to that side to this session. You want to join me? Or, hey, what are you looking at next? So I felt like being all in the same room, because it was smaller and because the expo hall was actually pleasant this time, I think made it a whole lot better. And I liked it smaller like that. Maybe their budgets didn't really like it for the conference organizers, but I think we attendees liked it in that smaller setting. So where should podcasters go now? You've got Podcast Movement going to New York City, Podcast Movement Evolutions going to South by Southwest, and which one should you go to? And that is a difficult question to answer. Podcast Movement is still the industry event, but it's becoming a lot less accessible, maybe more expensive, and maybe more corporate. Evolution seems like it would probably tailor more toward reaching the general content creators at South by Southwest, like people who also podcast, or maybe people who are creating lots of other content and then want to learn how to podcast. So Evolutions might have a lot of beginner-focused things or more content creator things, whereas Podcast Movement proper would be more corporate-focused and more advertising, business-related. And I think that being in New York City will especially help them to reach those people, literally reach them in that space, that they'll be really close to those people. So if you could attend only one big podcasting event per year, and by podcasting event, I mean an event about podcasting. So it would help you be a better podcaster and allow you to network with other podcasters. If you could attend only one per year, then I think it should be Podfest. See, Podfest is always in Orlando. It's been in Tampa sometimes in the past, but I think in the future it's always going to be in Orlando. And that's an easy place to get to. It's also a place with lots of options around in the area. It's not like you're in the middle of nowhere and it's only the event hotel is the only option. There's plenty to do in the Orlando area. And Podfest as a conference is structured much more around the independent podcasters. And it seems like it's holding its size, or maybe even growing. I don't have a lot to compare to because I haven't been to all of the Podfests, unfortunately. But I would have gone if I could have. It's just life things happened that prevented me from going. But plus, the Podcast Hall of Fame has moved to Podfest. So that brings some special excitement too. And I've been assured that future Hall of Fame productions will return to high quality again. I don't know whether I'll make it to either Podcast Movement event in 2026, but I'll definitely be at Podfest. And I might even be exhibiting at Podfest with a booth. We'll see. But will I see you there? Please let me know. And what do you think about these events too? Which one seems like the better option now? And if you made it to all three of these events, especially Podfest, Podcast Movement Evolutions, and Podcast Movement proper, I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts, especially on this merger and everything changing and happening, and the thoughts on the latest event and what you might focus on going forward. Please let me know. You can comment on the notes for this episode, a simple tap or swipe away, maybe, or go to the audacity2podcast.com/PM25, or reach out to me on social networks. I'm pretty much everywhere as the Daniel J. Lewis. Thanks to Brian Ensminer from Top Tier Audio for streaming 418 Satoshis on my previous episode. And my new app for making podcast chapters is coming very soon. I have people beta testing it right now, and it's a full beta, so I don't have room for many other people to join. But I'd love for you to sign up when it's available, and I will certainly tell you about that when it is. And if you love the Audacity to Podcast and value the podcasting inspiration and education that I provide, would you please consider giving back, whatever you feel it's worth to you. If you feel like, that was worth $1, then go ahead, send $1. If you feel like, oh man, this was worth $500, that's what I want to give, then go ahead and give it. Go to theaudacity2podcast.com/giveback, or you can stream payments through your modern podcasting 2.0 app. Now that I've given you some of the guts and taught you some of the tools, it's time for you to go start and grow your own podcast for passion and profit. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacity2podcast.com. Thanks for listening. "404 not found."